General David Petraeus, thank you so much for joining us for the Cipher Brief's dispatches from Kyiv. You just concluded a week of very high-level meetings as part of the Cipher Brief's Kyiv Forum, meeting with Ukraine's Minister of Defense, the Commander-in-Chief of Ukraine's Armed Forces, members of Parliament. What are your key takeaways from these meetings and others that you've had there?
Well, Suzanne, I think there are a lot of challenges ahead. The Ukrainians clearly recognize that. They've taken a very important step this week in signing the new conscription law that drops the age at which individuals can be called up from 27 to 25. Doesn't sound like a huge deal. It is. That's about 100,000 men who will likely be able to be conscripted as a result of this. And also the huge urgency, of course, for resumption of U.S. assistance. The Europeans have done their part. The EU even provided an additional 50 billion euros several weeks ago. Only the U.S. has the industrial strength weapons systems that are so desperately needed. And that amount that's in Congress could literally be decisive over the course of this year, which is going to be a tough year. The Ukrainians recognize that they're largely going to have to be on the defensive this year. In a way, if we revisit the whole experience here from the beginning, I think the first year, many people were overly pessimistic about the chances of Ukraine, and the Ukrainians surprised massively to the upside, winning the battles of Kyiv, Kharkiv, Chernihiv, Sumy, Kherson, in even Kharkiv province. The second year, I think, can be characterized as a period where individuals were overly optimistic about the prospects for the summer offensive. Although as we look back at that, we realize now how that came about, partly because the Western systems didn't get into their hands early enough. There were delays in decisions that proved very costly. And then the Russians, to be fair to them, established a very, very formidable defense in the south. So there was some achievement, modest, not enough to really change the dynamics in the way that had been hoped. And this year, I think the way to characterize it is that there is a realistic assessment, and the reality is that it is very, very tough. But the Ukrainians have taken this very important step. The Americans we need to resume our assistance and to really fill that pipeline back up to enable the Ukrainians to hold the territory that they have now, recognizing that, they retook at least half of what the Russians seized in the early stages of the war, and then see where the dynamics are and see what might be possible after that.
The U.S. aid package for Ukraine has been held up for months now because of politics. How has Russia seized on this opportunity and used it to their advantage?
Well, Russia's taking a number of actions. First of all, they are mobilizing more forces themselves, but I don't think you'll really see those entering the ranks in Ukraine until the summer. They've made tactical adjustments that are proving to be very difficult for the Ukrainians to counter, particularly the use of what are called glide bombs that can be launched as much as 70 kilometers from the front lines. And the Ukrainians really don't have the kind of air and missile defenses that can neutralize that particular threat at this point in time. Resuming our assistance will provide part of the answer, so will some of the other additions to their arsenal. But they're really plastering certain areas with those. And then there's been a very precise targeting of the Ukrainian infrastructure, particularly energy generation and transmission. And we've seen literally just in the last 2 weeks a big effort to do that around critical areas like Kharkiv in the eastern part of Ukraine, the second largest city in the country. And that's presenting difficulties. Again, obviously, a big repair effort will be required before next winter. But again, this is where the air defense and ballistic missile defenses need to be shored up again by U.S. assistance.
Sir, you had a private meeting with Ukraine's Commander-in-Chief, General Syrskyi. What was your takeaway in terms of Ukraine's ability to fight this war while not getting the aid package that it needs from Washington?
Well, General Syrskyi, of course, is the new Chief of Defense Staff. They call him Commander-in-Chief here of the Ukrainian military. They're Chairman of the Joint Chiefs equivalent. I'm very impressed by him, frankly. I knew his predecessor, General Zaluzhny, as well. I think Syrskyi is very much going to fill this position very admirably. But again, he has his hands full. He's allocating shortages, if you will, as every battlefield commander. I never had what I hoped we would have in Iraq or Afghanistan. So you're always trying to answer to the extent that you can the many requests from those who are on the front lines. He's grappling with that, how to prioritize, how to enable his forces to the extent that he can. But this is somebody who's been on the front lines of this war for many, many years. He was the key to the defense of Kyiv at the outset of the latest episode here. But before that, he was down in Donetsk and Luhansk during the period in 2014 when the Russians seized Crimea and then supported the separatists in those two provinces in the southeast. And he's been in and out of this just constantly. He has a very good feel for those on the front lines. You can sense that he's one of those that clearly, sincerely loves his soldiers. And what they're doing now is very rapid integration of unmanned systems. This is where there have been successes. Again, the Ukrainians have basically cleared out the Western Black Sea. They've sunk 30% or so of the Russian Black Sea fleet using a combination of air and maritime drones. Very, very effective in that regard. And that's crucial. This is a real breakthrough because it opens up the Western Black Sea so the Ukraine can once again export grain and other materials that are so important to their fiscal bottom line. They keep in mind they're also so important to North African countries who depend on Ukrainian grain. It's about 25% of the world's exports in grain, so it's very significant. And their food security really rests on the ability to import that. So that's a very important achievement. And on the front lines, what they're doing is much greater use of drones as opposed to soldiers. They're using especially the first-person view drones that they're receiving from Western countries and producing large numbers of themselves as well. So these developments are ones that Ukraine is pursuing. And again, you see an action and reaction, and they're having to do applications, every 30 days or so, there's a new software change. You can really see hints, maybe even more than hints, of the future of warfare here in Ukraine. And it's evolved very rapidly. It's already been transformed just from the last trip here, which was back in September.
Do you believe that this aid package, if passed, can make it to the front lines and the other parts of Ukraine that really, really need it now for manufacturing, to get the weapon systems that are needed? Is it going to make it in time for Ukraine to be able to take back any significant land or make any real advantages on the military battlefield?
Well, again, it depends on a number of different factors. I think the key really is to stabilize the lines this year. The Russians are throwing enormous quantities of soldiers at the Ukrainian defenses. Incredibly costly, modest gains, incremental gains. But they've got to hold these lines, and I think that's really going to be largely the focus of this year. If they have tactical opportunities, they're ready to take those, but they can't do that without, again, this whole pipeline not just beginning to flow, but actually with rounds at the guns near the front line, with the soldiers, weapon systems shored back up, air defenses rebuilt in some cases as well. It's crucial. The Ukrainians are doing their part more than their part. I mean, and by the way, they're fighting our common enemy. This is in our national security interests, absolutely. And they're actually dealing with the Russians in a way that is very, very impressive.
I just want to do a quick pulse check here. The Ukrainians have been fighting this war for 2 years now. There is growing frustration about the politics and the foot dragging in Washington, understandably so, because every day that passes, Ukrainian soldiers are losing their lives. They're coming back injured. What is your sense of the Ukrainian mindset under these incredibly difficult conditions?
There's no question about the continued determination of the Ukrainians. They're involved in their war of independence, and they're doing everything they possibly can to ensure their continued freedom, their continued security in the face of this brutal and unprovoked invasion by a neighbor who believes they don't have a right to exist. We can't let Ukraine fail. We can't let Russia win. If that happens, they're not going to stop here in Ukraine. They're going to, next will be Moldova, then Lithuania, perhaps the other Baltic states. This is a threat to all of our NATO partners, and it's really a threat to the Western world. If naked aggression like this is allowed to succeed, we'll see more of it around the world. And finally, If we don't help Ukraine in its hour of need, no one's going to believe that we're going to help other countries around the world in their hours of need.
General David Petraeus in Kyiv, Ukraine, thank you so much for being here on the Cipher Brief's Dispatches from Kyiv.